Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Grant Writing Success Tips and Tricks. My name is Susan Durnan, and I am the Administration Lead of the Mississauga Arts Council. This webinar is part of our TD Culture Lab Professional Development webinar series presented by Mississauga Arts Council and sponsored by TD Bank Group. The Mississauga Arts Council is dedicated to enabling the growth of the arts by creating opportunity and connection between artists and residents in Mississauga and beyond. Celebrating our milestone 40th anniversary this year, the Mississauga Arts Council is a registered charity dedicated to accelerating progress toward the attainment of our vision of Mississauga as a vibrant cultural community where arts and culture thrive. Mississauga Arts Council acknowledges that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and Wyandot Nation. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and give our respect to these people and their ancestors who have been inhabitants of this land since time immemorial. We also recognize that Mississauga is now home to many global Indigenous peoples. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Rohit Meda, founder of DoGood Fundraising. A University of Toronto graduate, Rohit has been active in the nonprofit sector for 16 years. His experience working in fundraising roles with several nonprofit and charities and over a decade volunteering as a board member and leader within the sector led him to start DoGood Fundraising. The business helps nonprofits, charities, and artists to raise funds through grant writing, funder research, and professional development training. Learn more at dogoodfundraising.ca. Welcome, Rohit, and thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Thank you so much to the Mississauga Arts Council for having me here today, and to everyone who's tuned in tonight. And I do want to remind folks that the chat is open. I wish we could be in person doing this in one room, but we're still at the end of this virtual reality. So please do feel free to leave questions in the chat, and thanks to Susan for directing those to me. I'm also keeping my eye on a screen where those questions will appear. So we've got a little less than an hour, and I'm just going to dive through some of the content here. So let's get into it. So this is DoGood Fundraising and what we offer: all-inclusive grant writing, prospect research, professional development training, and monthly consultation. We certainly work with artists, and we're lucky to receive a number of referrals from the Mississauga Arts Council. Today, we're going to start by talking about 10 common grant writing mistakes. And this comes from direct experience, having worked with artists on various arts grants. The bulk of the presentation will be dedicated towards arts grant opportunities. There are so many opportunities. I'm super excited to share that multiple grants are available and coming up. So please take notes. Any of these opportunities, we can certainly dive in with you down the road. I do encourage you to reach out to the Mississauga Arts Council if you do require further support on any of the grants. And then we'll spend some time at the end in discussion. If you have burning questions, that's really one opportunity to bring those up. You can also put them in the chat as we go along. So let's talk about 10 common grant writing mistakes. I was a past grant reviewer with the Ontario Trillium Foundation. I spent 2 years with the Ministry of Children and Youth Services, and that was before starting this business. So we see a lot of common mistakes, and here's the top 10. So number 10, not having statistics or data. Very often when we're working on arts grants, artists have to tell their story, right? We have to indicate what we've been able to achieve in the past. This could be number of albums sold, how many exhibitions we've done, what was the result of those exhibitions. Maybe we've sold some works. So this data is super important, and this actually tells the funder what the demand is or what the interest is in your art. Always make sure that when you're coming up with information about your artistic practice, you avoid broad statements about Ontario or Canada, and you really focus on your local geography and what you're able to achieve within that geography from an economic standpoint and from another impact standpoint. Top 10 mistakes, number 9, submitting late to grant applications. All of us have been there where we're submitting a grant at 11:59 p.m. It happens, but I don't encourage it, and certainly in my practice, we don't do that. Often systems can crash at the last minute. Things can get really stressful. We just encourage you not to do that. In today's presentation, we'll share so many dates that are coming up in March and April. It truly gives you enough time to work ahead. We actually, at Do Good Fundraising, we actually cut off our grant commitments 2 weeks prior to the grant, because in previous years we received so many requests within like 3 days, 2 days of the deadline, and we've just stopped saying yes to those. And I think you should as well. You should stop saying yes when an opportunity comes in your inbox, the night before, 2 nights before. It's not worth it. Submit your applications early. There's a higher chance of success. Also, always save a copy. Nothing more embarrassing than winning a grant and then asking the funder for the grant application that you submitted because you lost it. And it happens all the time. When in doubt, and especially when you're thinking that maybe your application is going to be late for a certain reason, I recommend that you reach out to the funder and let them know. Funders are flexible, especially considering we're coming out of a pandemic. They know people's situations have changed, and they're probably likely to actually provide some sort of flexibility. Top 10 most common mistakes. Number 8, not utilizing attachments. So in many grant applications, the funder says, you may attach an extra document here. You may attach supplemental information. You have to consider this. As artists, the work we do is not always seen on paper, right? I spent a number of years playing trombone. The work we did in jazz bands and orchestras is hard to communicate in a grant application. But if you can attach a short video or at least an image of you performing in front of an audience, or maybe you're a visual artist and you have an exhibition, or maybe you're a playwright and you've been able to produce a really great production, you've been part of a really great theater production, show the funder that, take a picture, put a caption underneath, but don't leave it blank, because it's actually very, very helpful to include attachments. Now, I do recommend including things like testimonials, newspaper clippings, even awards, features. Maybe you've won a Marty's Award with Mississauga Arts Council. This is actually highly valued on the funder side, because it adds legitimacy to yourselves as a professional artist. And so do consider that sort of material as part of a strong grant application. Top 10 most common mistakes. Number 7, underselling your work. As artists and as creative people, we're able to make a huge impact in the community, but sometimes we actually undersell our own work. We think, I haven't sold that many pieces compared to other artists, or maybe I haven't sold that many albums, or maybe I haven't had that many audience members. It doesn't matter. You need to focus on yourself and your individual practice, and you need to provide specific examples of achievements and work that were achievements for you. Try not to compare yourself to other artists. And so what I say is include those statistics without judgment. Don't judge yourself thinking you're too small or you're too niche. Every artist is really assessed on their own merit, and funders don't often compare artists to each other unless you're in a competitive category, think factor, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. That's a little different. But on most grants, they're looking at you as an individual and they're saying, what does this artist bring to the grant application, and what do they bring to the program? And quite honestly, I think this is an opportunity to actually brag about yourself. And so I think if you are applying for a grant, as opposed to underselling your work, you should really kind of boast about your accomplishments. This is one of the only parts of life where it's totally accepted and welcomed. Top 10 most common mistakes. Number 6, not expressing a sense of urgency. We're coming out of the biggest economic challenge probably of the century, of this century, in terms of artists losing gig opportunities, losing performances, losing all forms of revenue sometimes. And so you need to create a sense of urgency. It's okay to talk about your financial circumstances in a grant application. It's okay to indicate how important a grant is for your professional development as an artist, or your next exhibition or an upcoming tour. Things like, this grant is essential to me because this funding will enable me to immediately, or without this grant, my artistic practice will decline or suffer, or I won't have a certain opportunity. You have to tell that story. You should not write a very plain and simple answer if there is a sense of urgency, and if that grant is really pivotal in your artistic practice. And so I just want to remind you that funders actually need a sense of urgency to prioritize your work. They will give a grant to someone who is expressing urgency, and maybe the other person whose application is a little bit kind of basic, that person might miss out because the other artist has said how urgent this opportunity is for them. And somebody asked a question about not having data. How can a new artist, how can a startup show data, right? Because I talked about mistake number 10, not having data. Sometimes you can talk about the local circumstance, so there's a grant for diverse artists, for instance, and you might find a statistic that says that in Mississauga, perhaps there's not that many diverse artists who are given opportunities to put on an exhibition or a showcase. And so I encourage you to look at the data sets that exist in your community. Perhaps your local business improvement association or board of trade has local data, but you really want to paint a picture as to why your artistic practice and your work is going to add value for that funder, or is going to help them achieve their outcome. We'll talk about a number of grants which are really targeted at different communities or different types of artists. And in those grants, you can certainly use local data to paint a picture. Top 10 most common mistakes on a grant application. Number 5, starting from scratch. Don't do it. I've worked with so many artists and organizations who seem to start every grant application as if they're just starting for the first time. You have bios. A lot of times you've given these out when you're putting on performances or exhibitions. A lot of folks are going to have strategic pitches, even if it's from a contest you entered or somebody asked you for information. Have all of that and put it in a Google Drive, put it in a Dropbox folder, and consider not just what does it cost for you to run your professional practice annually, but consider all the attachments that you worked so hard on in the past. Many times we're working on a grant application and people are getting bios of their team members, and sometimes they're saying to me, I don't know where to get this bio, and I'm Googling things. Shouldn't have to do that. If you're collaborating with someone, you have time to reach out to them and ask for a bio. Certainly you should have a list of your productions, a list of your albums if you're a musician, details on your sales. Keep all that stuff aside, because at some point, if not following this presentation, maybe at some point in the year, you're going to have an opportunity, and it just, it's a matter of going into your Google Drive or your Dropbox folder, pulling all that data, and then submitting that to a funder with answers to their questions. So continuing along here, top 10 most common mistakes on grants for artists. Number 4, no commitment to long-term projects. So as funders, and having been on a provincial grant review body multiple times, it's very clear to us when a project has been made up, right? We'll see projects and we'll say, okay, this doesn't really relate to this individual or to this organization. And so funders can tell when you're doing something that's maybe a little bit different from what you normally do. It's maybe steering in a bit of a different direction. So you have to stick to your artistic practice, stick to your style, stick to your area of focus. If you're a jazz musician and all of a sudden you're in the community, doing works of art on canvas, that's fine. But, you really want that track record to show that you've been doing gigs, you've been producing albums, you've been, clearing multiple ticket sales at concert halls. That's what counts. Maybe the jazz musician career isn't necessarily going to support the visual arts application. And so what I'm trying to say is long-term work receives more interest and more money from funders. And you'll see in today's presentation that experienced artists, so mid-career and experienced artists, certainly receive a lot more money than some of the new and emerging folks. And so I learned a long time ago that if you really want to be successful as an artist, you really need to stick to one thing and do it well for a period of time, maybe 10 years, maybe more. But certainly long-term commitment receives more investment. So top 10 mistakes, number 3, spelling and grammar. This can be frustrating, especially when we have Microsoft Word and it's great, helpful suggestions. Google Docs literally suggests things and corrects them as you type. I've heard Grammarly is very good. I don't use it, but I've heard good things. Please don't use the antique online portals that OAC and Factor and all these other funders use. Try and get out of those portals and instead try and write your stuff in Word or Google Docs. so that you can copy and paste your information into the portals. You get a few benefits here. Number one, you're not going to lose your stuff. So I've heard horror stories across the board, nonprofit grants, artist grants, of people working on things, and then there's a crash, there's a systems crash, internet crash, and they lose everything. And I never want that to happen. But that being said, even if you've taken the time to author your proposals, you should really be thoroughly reviewing it, even for grammar. Does it make sense? Do you know how many times as a grant reviewer I looked at a grant and I had to reread the sentence, then read it again, then read it again, because it wasn't making sense. And it was a case of poor structure, confusing structure. I've seen horrible spelling mistakes. I've seen spelling mistakes that shouldn't have made it into the grant submission. And it really makes it difficult to read. And sometimes it actually lowers the applicant's reputation, or it definitely lowers your score as well. Now, if English isn't your first language, I totally respect that. Get somebody else to review it. And that's something certainly that I'd be willing to do for anyone if they needed a grant review. But at the end of the day, spelling and grammar mistakes, let's make sure it doesn't happen. Top 10 mistakes, number 2, using jargon. Especially in the art sector, where certain reviewers might not understand a subsector or the specific type of work you do. Certainly acronyms is one that I really would encourage you to not use. Maybe if it's a fairly well-known acronym, SOCAN, Factor, these are acronyms themselves, the funders. But if you're writing a grant application and you mention that you received a SOCAN or a Factor grant, that's fine. There's other types of jargon that can be a little bit too complex. So really focus on using the funder's own language. And if they're using jargon, that's great. Use their jargon. But if you have a family member or a friend read your application and they're not understanding what you're writing, probably it's because it's too complex. So you need to write your application so that grant reviewers actually get it. They understand what you're trying to say. And the top most common mistake when it comes to applying for grants as an artist, not answering the question. Believe it or not, some people actually don't answer the question. In fact, on grants that I've scored low in my days as a reviewer, you would look at the answer and then you would look at the question and you can tell when somebody's answering a question, it's going in a different direction. They start off by giving some random statistics, then they start telling a random story. What I like to say is, in the first sentence of your answer, you should answer the question. So the question is, why have you chosen this particular stream? I have chosen this stream because blah, blah, blah. Will you be able to continue this project if you are not awarded funds? No, unfortunately, I will not be able to continue with this project if not awarded funds. And you answer, right? But so many people won't answer the question. And the bottom line is, your reviewers don't have time to find your answers. So you got to make it easy for them. But also, the way that they're going to score an answer is much higher if it's a complete answer. If they feel like, the person has satisfactorily answered the question. And so you need to go back and check that. And you need to avoid what we call fluff in grant writing. These are vague statements. The art sector has suffered so much in the past 2 years. Like, most people know that, right? And so you want to avoid things that are really well known, or you want to avoid talking about why artists in general are so important to the community and the economy. Like, talk about why you are important within your professional practice, or if you're a group, why your group and the work you do is super important. But generally, try and include the answer to the question right in the first sentence, so that funders can see that you're answering the question. So for those of you who are just joining us, we just covered the top 10 most common mistakes when artists apply for grants. Now we're going to talk about current grant opportunities. And I hope you have a pen and paper handy, because this is a lot. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly because I really want to encourage discussion. Okay, so how do these opportunities work? Generally speaking, there's an online portal. So OAC, Ontario Arts Council, has NOVA. I don't even know what it stands for, but NOVA is what you probably want to have an account on. I think almost everyone on this webinar today should go into the OAC website. You can just Google Ontario Arts Council. and you create one. It doesn't take you very long. They ask you for your name and your address, a few details. You really have to reside in Ontario. That's a must. And generally, artists ask you to provide an artist bio, a CV or a resume, and history, right? So they want to know who is this person? Prove to us that you are a professional artist. Give us a little bit of your background. So be sure to answer very specific questions related to the project and be prepared to have all the details. One of the things that we laugh about a lot when me and folks are on the phone is, okay, it's February and they're expecting us to know exactly which venue we've booked in August, how much we're paying, how many people are attending. Like, how on earth would the funder expect us to know that? Well, they do, first of all. If you don't know, you can make it up, you can estimate, but they want you to know so many details about your project. It's so well planned. It's so detailed that you've thought everything through. Is it okay if things change later on? Yes, that's fine. But generally, they want you to answer everything, around what is the project, how's it going to impact you, what's the impact to the community. They want a budget. They don't just want you to say, instrument rental, $1,000. Renting a facility to put on an exhibition, $5,000. That's very vague. And I see folks do this all the time. So I'm going to advise against it. I think what you need to do is you actually need to go to those venues. You need to go to Long and McQuaid. You need to go to the gallery that you're going to rent out. You need to get a specific quote. You also need to say to them, hey, we're applying to an OAC grant in March. We're not expecting to hear back until August. Can you give us the rates for, August of 2022, right? Because you don't want things to change and then, you have to now come up with $200 extra out of pocket. So let your vendors and the folks that you're purchasing from, let them know that, you're not even going to hear back for another 4.5 months if it's Ontario Arts Council. And then generally you have to, sign some declaration pages and submit. Nothing is done in ink anymore. When I started this business, things still had to be done in ink. It was super annoying. Now that COVID has happened, I think funders have totally moved away from having to do things on paper, and everything is digital, everything is online. It's great. Okay, let's talk more about the general structure of arts grants. And yeah, just a note about when you're applying for portals, it can certainly be quick, but it can take some time for your profile to be approved. So get it done early. Yes, especially Canada Council for the Arts. I can't tell you the stuff I've been through having to get a portal approved by Canada Council for the Arts. It can be very challenging. And so I haven't even included Canada Council very much in this presentation because I think for most artists, your best bet is some of the grants we're talking about here. But if you have a Canada Council portal approved and the Canada Council knows who you are and knows about your work, you may be able to benefit from a grant from there. But certainly their portal process is so debilitating that I wouldn't personally promote them very much. So let's talk about funding opportunities in music. So the Ontario Arts Council has music production and presentation projects. So there's a lot of categories here. And what you'll find with some of these grants is they are a grant within a grant, okay? So you can be an individual. You can get up to $20,000. You can be a professional group, professional organization or collective. You can get $20,000. You can be a group that's providing training only, $5,000. And you could be semi-professional and sort of community-based, and that's $15,000. If you're reading this a little confused, it is confusing, and I do encourage you to take the name, so music production and presentation projects, and actually get on the Ontario Arts Council's website and read it if this is for you. So March 24th, you have about a month to apply. That should be enough time. And this grant is one of the best music grants because everybody's welcome. If you're producing music, if you're presenting music, there's so many folks that'll fit within this. And it has 2 deadlines, which is great. So you can even try and go for March 24th. And if you find it to be extremely overwhelming, which a first-time OAC grant can be extremely overwhelming, then you just defer and you apply in October. But a great opportunity for musicians. And here's another one. This is music creation. So this is a little different. There's self-directed creation, and then there's commissioning, right? So if you're composing, you're writing, you're enhancing music, that's available to the public. Even if you're like a community orchestra or a group that brings people together and presents music, makes a new genre of music available to the public, that all fits within this. Individuals are welcome, artists who are collaborating are welcome, organizations are welcome. So April 14th is the deadline to note, and then again in September. Many OAC grants, what I have to say I love about this funder is that they are multiple times a year. What I don't love is that there's sometimes a lack of transparency where you get on a call with them and they don't always tell you why a grant got declined. So it's great that they have 2 deadlines. You should use that to your advantage. You should apply on April 14th, and God forbid something goes wrong and you don't get the grant. You call them, you try and get as much information out of them as you can, and then you apply again in September. Generally speaking, if a funder gives you advice and you follow that advice to the T and you do everything they say, you have a much higher chance of success. And OAC program managers will tell you that most people get declined on the first try. And so they'll say it, I'll say it. Don't be disheartened by that. Yes, it's a heck of a lot of work, but it's totally worth applying, for instance, on April 14th for music creation projects. And then if you don't get it, applying again in September. So continuing along, music opportunities are actually far and wide. And so music recording projects closes in May. This is a really big one. A lot of artists who reach out to us at Do Good Fundraising talk about the fact that they're putting on some sort of a demo EP, they're recording a full-length album, they'd like grants. This is one of the best grants, I think, for that, because they're giving, $4,000, $10,000. It's enough to get your mixing and mastering done. It's enough to get some of the other things done when you're producing an album. And it's open to individuals, organizations, collectives. So May 17th, and then again in November, this is a really big opportunity. And note that they fund demo or EP recordings and then full-length albums. So does another prominent funder. And that is Factor. So Factor definitely funds very similar things. So they have a Juried sound recording grant. This is a massive grant. It's a lot of work. We've done it before, and it's a package that needs to be sent to them. But look at that. They'll fund 75% of the total eligible budget to a maximum of $67,500. You can get money from marketing. You can get money to promote your music on the radio. You can even get up to $10,000 for the sound recording component. So think about how you can stack grants. Stacking grants means, maybe you're putting out a full-length album and it's going to cost $20,000. And maybe you go 6,000 from here, 6,000 from there, another 8,000 from here. You are stacking, right? Maybe you go 6,000, 6,000, 6,000, and then a $2,000 sponsorship. Okay, so I think it's important that you consider how these grants match up. And many times funders will love the fact that you're applying for a grant from OAC here, and then you're also applying for a grant from Factor there. A secret tip I'll tell you about funding: no funder ever wants to fund 100% of your project. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how good you are, they do not want to fund 100%. You can imagine that it's quite risky for a funder to provide 100% of the funding, and then if things go wrong, they've lost all that money. They don't want that risk. They don't want 100% of the risk. And so in this grant in particular, you could acquire, produce, and market a full-length album. Pretty massive opportunity for anybody in the music sector. And so there are grants that I want to talk about that are Toronto specific. So, there's a lot going on right now where many artists really share sort of the space between Toronto and Mississauga. They'll perform in either city. Sometimes they'll reside in either city. What you need to know about the Toronto opportunities in this presentation is that Toronto residence is absolutely mandatory for the Toronto Arts Council grant. You have to have lived there for at least a year. I think they introduced this because people were probably not living in Toronto for at least a year. And so Toronto Arts Council wants you to be a resident, and they want you to really prove it. They're pretty strict about this. Now, in this grant, music creation and audio recording, very similar to some of the other grants mentioned, they'll give $5,000 for creation, up to $4,000 for your demo or EP, and up to $10,000 for full-length album. So if you do reside in Toronto, or if maybe one of your collaborators does and they can apply for the grant, you have yet another opportunity here. So nobody should be putting out an album or a demo without some funding. If you're in the room, if you're one of the 27 people that's listening right now. So as I said, Toronto residence is required. This is a September 6th deadline. Doesn't mean you have to apply on September 6th. You can apply before. It's always a good idea with Toronto Arts Council or Ontario Arts Council to call them, get to know the program manager a little bit, spend 10 minutes with them. It really, truly makes a difference. I think as somebody who's been on the grant review side of the table, I have to say there's almost an unfair advantage if the program manager knows you. So I encourage you to get to know them on a very personable basis. Let them know who you are and what challenges you've had. It will probably work to your advantage. And in those calls, it's really asking a few questions and they'll scribble down your name somewhere, and that makes a difference. So do connect with Toronto Arts Council as well if you're interested in seeking out their funding. Just taking a look here to see if there's any questions on the chat. If you need me to go back and show a slide again, please don't hesitate to ask. Music continues. Songwriter Development. This is a very small grant. It's only up to $2,000, which is considered small within all these grants. And so they'll cover up to a year of songwriting initiatives. They used to say domestic and international travel, and it still says that online. I think there's a bit of an asterisk there where if you don't have to do international travel, don't apply for that either. I think the kind of travel that they would probably be more comfortable funding is local, provincial, within Ontario. They're very big of and within Canada, of course, they're very big on funding within Canada because it's a federally funded grant. But they'll cover co-writing, trips, songwriting camps, workshops, showcases, things that you're doing with other artists. And Factor is all about really furthering the needle on music and the music industry and musicians in Canada. So this is probably one of the shorter grant applications. It's really easy for somebody who's trying to get into this. And don't wait. It's a rolling deadline. And generally what happens is there's a pot of money, and as it completes, it gets more competitive and you have less of a chance of success. If you're listening to this right now and thinking that songwriter development might be for you, certainly apply. You won't regret it. You'll need a Factor profile, of course. You'll have to go on their website, create that. It's quite an antique website. Feels like it was built in the 90s. And so, be patient with it. And if you're not sure how to navigate it, even I was kind of wondering where certain buttons are when I first started. You got to reach out to them. Things might not even show up on your computer based on which internet browser you use, whether it's Chrome or Safari or Internet Explorer. So be patient with it and call them if you can't navigate it, because it's an incredibly odd portal. Let's talk about theater. So we're lucky to work with a few theater organizations, and there are opportunities available, some closing as soon as March. If you are Toronto-based, organizations and collectives can apply for long-term projects. That closes March 15th. And I've left a lot of these out of the presentation. There's many long-term operating grants, that sort of thing. I think a lot of the artists here are Mississauga Arts Council members. They're individual artists. And so we've talked a lot more about individuals in this presentation. You can take a deeper dive into some of the longer-term opportunities if you are associated with an organization or a collective. And so I just thought I'd put that one there. But the opportunity for playwrights is pretty interesting. Closes on June 15th, and that's for individual artists. Folks have reached out to me in the past and asked if there was a grant like this. And in the past, I wasn't aware of it, but I was surprised to see that this has opened or will be opening for playwrights to apply. Again, Toronto residence is required there, but what a great opportunity for folks to apply for grants. Let's talk more about theater. So OAC's theater projects is probably one of the biggest theater grants in the sector. So have a look at all the different pools of funding. There's 5 of them within the grant. This is a grant within a grant. Creation, $5,000. Creation in residence, right? So I'm assuming you have to get some sort of residence opportunity, $10,000. Workshops. So very interesting that if your organization is putting on workshops, they'll pay you even more, $15,000, and then productions are $20,000. They also fund festivals and initiatives. And so you want to think about what you're doing as an individual artist. Who are you collaborating with? Sometimes you can end up leveraging a little bit more money just through those collaborations. Of course, this is open to individuals. It's also open to collectives. It's also open to organizations. You just have to be professional artists. Many funders will differentiate between who's professional and who's sort of an amateur artist. And in many of these grants, they are really looking for professional level artists who will demonstrate dedication to the cause and to the trade. And February 9th has passed. I just wanted to put that up there so you know that, but August 3rd is your next deadline. So do apply, and if you need help, certainly reach out to Mississauga Arts Council and they can put you in touch with us. We have written that grant before. Now, visual arts has a ton of opportunities, and I know we certainly have visual artists on the webinar here. And so somebody asked if Mississauga artists can apply for Toronto Arts Council grants. And the reality is, unless you live in Toronto or unless a collaborator on your project has a Toronto residence of at least a year, you actually can't apply for those grants. And so it is quite frustrating if that is the case. And, you know, we in Mississauga have our own thriving arts sector. We don't need to live in the shadows of Toronto, but somehow the way that government funding flows, they've gotten a huge chunk of the pie. And so I would be remiss if I didn't name some of those opportunities. You know, right now we don't have all the grants that are open in Mississauga. I'm not sure what the city of Mississauga is doing on that front, but if you keep in touch with Mississauga Arts Council, you know, they'll certainly keep you aware of upcoming opportunities that are more closer to home. This presentation is designed to be a little generic, so to give you a little bit of a generic taste, but you know, Mac has a great newsletter. I'm on it. If you're not on it already, you should be, and tell your friends. And so that's the way that we can all keep each other updated and informed on these opportunities. So visual arts, visual artists program at Toronto Arts Council closes in October. Again, don't wait until October to apply. $5,000 for level 1. So you have between 2 and 7 years of independent arts practice experience, and $10,000 for level 2. That means you have more than 7 years of experience and national or international recognition. Remember that I said at the beginning of the presentation that the longer term you're invested in your professional practice, the more funders reward you. You're going to start seeing that here with this multi-level sort of dichotomy system where experienced artists can apply for more money, and they know that because they know that as experienced artists, you're totally depending on it for your livelihood. You're probably doing bigger projects, things cost more. And so if you're wondering whether to continue with your professional practice, I say definitely. The longer you're in it, the more respect and money you get from funders. That's closing in October. Visual artists program, and then other visual arts grants from OAC, which are totally open to everybody, begin with the visual artists creation projects. So this is a really good grant because it's truly open to everyone and it's quite broad. Emerging artists can apply for up to $5,000. Mid-career artists, $7,500. Established artists, $15,000, right? So this is your opportunity, especially as established artists who are professionals who really rely on your works to generate income and livelihood. This is your opportunity to put pen to paper and let them know how you're creating new work, get that support behind you, get that OAC logo on your projects. And May 4th is coming up sooner than you think. And like I said, if something goes wrong and it doesn't work out, you can always take the feedback of a decline and then apply again in November. I think that's strategically why they've had those 2 cycles. And you know, we've been on feedback calls with artists. Sometimes we wrote the grant, sometimes we didn't write the grant. And the OAC does provide some direction and some guidance that can be used to improve your application. And if you're just joining us, what I was saying before was that if you take the advice that the funder gives you and you implement that, the next time you're applying for a grant, you're way more likely to be successful. So that one's in May and November. And then visual arts projects, right? Note how the names are very similar. Visual arts projects closes November 24th, my birthday. And the presentation amount is $10,000, and curatorial research and development is also $10,000. So think about any visual arts project that you're presenting. Think about research that you're doing. It's really interesting that a funder like this would provide money for research and development. As artists, we're going to be doing the research and development anyway, and many of us do it out of pocket. So to be able to receive funding for that is incredible. And I do encourage you to go after that if you want to do something new, ambitious, different, and you're looking for money to support that. And I'm just keeping my eye on the chat if anyone has any questions. I know I'm talking quickly. If you need me to go back and go back to a particular slide, please let me know. So I know there's a question about visual arts, and the question is, what about opportunities for another province outside of Ontario? You know, generally with Ontario Arts Council grants, they really want to fund Ontario. The reason why is because it's taxpayer money from the province. So you pay your taxes to the government, and the government kind of sends it back through groups like OAC. They are taxpayer funded dollars, and so they want it to help the taxpayers, which are Ontarians. And so if you're an Ontario artist and you're promoting yourself outside of Ontario, there are opportunities for that sort of thing. It used to be a lot bigger before the pandemic. Touring and traveling exhibitions used to be huge. Now it's sort of a bit of a gray space. And so do reach out to the funder if you want to promote yourself outside of province. A lot of this work is really more meant to be Ontario-based, within Ontario, for Ontario. So moving into the media arts, if you're a media artist, one of the best grants is Media Artist Creation Projects. That's closing on April 7th, and then again in October. I was pretty surprised to see that you can get up to $10,000 for emerging artists, but up to $40,000 for mid-career and established artists. I don't think OAC gives this much money in any other category, as far as I know. So that's a lot of money. If you can get yourself to that mid-career and established level, we know there's a lot happening in the media arts space, especially that most of us have been glued to a computer for the last 2 years. And so I do really encourage you to look at that. But you start to see that OAC has certain restrictions, and one of them I've added here is you cannot apply to the visual artists creation projects in the same year. So it would be a shame if somebody was applying to the media artists creation projects and they got declined because they've already applied to visual artists creation projects. Please avoid this mistake. I've seen it happen before. It's not fun. So going back to factors, somebody asked, is an artist development grant different than a songwriter development grant? And is that grant also a rolling deadline? And I'm not sure if I included the songwriter development grant on here, but the factor artist development grant is certainly, let me just go back to that really quickly here. Okay, so songwriter development is a rolling deadline. It's one of their kind of broad grants that they offer, very sort of easy to get into, easy to access. This is different. Songwriter development grant, juried sound recording, songwriter development, and artist development. So songwriter development is different from artist development. I don't believe I've included artist development on here. And I think the reason why is because I don't think that they'd updated their date when I was doing my research and putting this presentation together. So that is a question that I will take back after this workshop, and I will go and investigate. And if I have to reach out to Factor, I will. And I can provide that information to Susan to maybe send to everybody. So Susan, if you can make a note of that, that would be wonderful. So we spoke about the media arts opportunities at OAC, the one closing in April. And then there's an opportunity for organizations. I thought to include this as well. It's called Media Arts Projects, right? So a little different from Media Artists Creation Projects. So Media Arts Projects closes at the end of April, April 28th, and that's up to $10,000. So sometimes it's worth applying to an organization to provide them with a service. I think this is one of the secrets I've learned about working in the nonprofit and charitable sector. So as artists who provide a service, you can offer your service to another organization, and then they can apply to the grant. So why do you need to know this? Because if you offer media arts projects and services and you do unique things, you can go up to an organization and say, hey, you can hire me and it won't cost you $1. Just apply to this OAC grant. We can help write that grant as well. And so just think about how you can leverage your skills to get funding, even though you may not be eligible as an individual. The organization would be eligible and they can pay you. It's like this wonderful triangle that once you figure this out, you can unlock a lot of funding. So media artists can apply to the Toronto Arts Council program if you live in Toronto. That closes in October, as many of their programs do. And so you can get up to $6,000 for emerging artists, but double if you're a mid-career and established artist. So think about it. If you're in the media arts, is it worth it to, if you're thinking of making the move out of Toronto, for example, is it worth it to make that move? Or think about if you collaborate with other artists. Sometimes, even though a grant is for an individual, it can include a collaboration. There is a way to go about this. You just have to make sure that whoever's applying has that Toronto residence. So if you have more questions about it, you can always just pick up the phone and call Toronto Arts Council. Don't feel nervous about that. And the program managers are, their job is to speak to artists, right? So don't be shy about asking the right questions, because you might be eligible for a grant, as long as you meet their requirements. Just keeping an eye on the time here, we're 10 to 8. If you do have burning questions that are coming up, now is a good time to add them into the chat. We're getting into dance. So long-term dance projects is a pretty big one, up to $45,000, so $15,000 per year for 3 years. This is for mid-career and established professional dance artists. So you've really spent time developing and presenting dance works, dance programs. Again, the Toronto residence is required, but I mean, look at this grant. If you're in this subsector, it's a big one, and that closes March 15th, so relatively soon. I think the timing of this presentation is great because most of the grant opportunities are actually coming up. Now, in dance, Ontario Arts Council has dance projects that closes March 29th and October 6th. This one can be a lot of work, especially because we're coming out of this time where you didn't know when you were able to put on a performance or a presentation. And so you really need to be looking ahead to what are you planning to do later in the year. OAC generally gives notification about 4.5 months after a deadline, right? So, April, May, June, July, maybe August, you'll be hearing back about this. And so if you're putting on a production or a presentation in July or June, don't apply because you likely won't even receive the news. But if you are putting on a production or presentation, or if you're just developing something, you don't even have to really produce and present it. It could be just the development phase. You can certainly receive money for that. And after August of this year, you can expect to actually get that notification. And if something went wrong, you can always apply in October. So look at the categories. Creation, $5,000. Production and presentation, $20,000. Series and festivals, $15,000. Mentorship, $2.5K. Mentorship is really interesting. If you're a senior artist, you can apply through another artist to mentor them and they can pay your fees, right? So you might not be able to apply as a mentor to get OAC funding, but they can apply for money to hire you. And then there's training for up to $7,500. Any impact of taxes on grants? Yeah, this one is unfortunate. When you receive a grant as an individual artist, it is your income. So I won a grant from the City of Brampton's Brampton Entrepreneurship Center back when they used to operate in person. And I was surprised that they wrote me a check. And I said, why did you guys write me a check? I run a startup. And they said, oh, this grant program is meant to help entrepreneurs. And so that money contributed to my income, right? And it's one of those things, sometimes people are counting on their income to be within a certain bracket for certain reasons. And so these grants actually do impact your income. And if you're getting a $20,000 grant, that could bump you into a different category, So you really got to think about that. When you're applying for grants, be very strategic. Talk to your accountant if you have one. Talk to a tax professional. See how that's going to impact your income, whether you have a day job, a part-time job, full-time job, or maybe you do your professional artistic practice full-time. You have to pay taxes on that. And you claim a grant as income, just the same way you claim a job. You get a slip. I'm not sure if it's a T4. I believe there's a certain name for it, which I can't remember right now, but you do get one of those slips and you do have to declare it as income. As an individual, of course. So Dance Projects closes March 29th and October 6th, development, production, and presentation. Then there's Toronto Arts Council's Dance Project. So they offer money for creation, production, dance series and festivals, dance field development. Anyone can apply, individuals, organizations, collectives. Pretty good opportunity, closing August 2nd. Continuing along here, craft. I've had 2 craft artists reach out in the past. And, you know, I never saw an opportunity until this one. $5,000 for emerging artists, $7,500 for mid-career, $15,000 for established artists. You know, which isn't a crazy amount of money, but it's pretty good if you're really in this subsector and you do this work. I think it can be a huge help. They have a category called connections for $12,000, collaborations for $15,000. They're a little similar, so you have to go back and read the definitions there. But collectives can apply, organizations can apply, individuals can apply. Yeah, somebody asked, if you don't use your grant money, do you have to pay it back? Yeah. And there's 2 pieces of advice here. Number 1, don't ask for money for things you don't need, right? You should really reduce your budget to as tight as it needs to be, right down to, you know, I need to rent a unique pair of speakers from Long and McQuaid, and it's going to cost me $528 over 2 days. You know, that's the level of detail you need. Because if you just write $1,000, the funder is going to look at that and say, I don't think they put any time and effort into this. I think they just waved their hand and said $1,000. But the worst thing is, you know, when you asked for $528, that $472 that's remaining has to be given back to the funder. You don't want to do that. The funder doesn't even want your money. They don't want it. So do yourself a favor, do the funder a favor. Don't ask for more money than you need, because if you do, you actually have to give it back, which is the worst thing. There's a little bit of flexibility. Generally, you know, if you look at the entire grant, if you're off by a few $100s, they'll just let you keep it sometimes. But if it's over $1,000 discrepancy, oh yeah, they're going to ask you to give it back. Literary opportunities. So maybe you're a writer. You know, maybe you're involved for various things. You're involved in some sort of poetry, storytelling, performance, or something else. It's very broad, which is great. Literary creation projects for literary works or literary performance closes at the end of October. $5,000 for creation, $10,000 for recording, creation and recording $15,000. This is a weird all or nothing grant. They do this sometimes. I'm not sure why, but I think it's easier for them to just offer all or nothing. And so, you know, you don't really have to put together the most detailed budget because they're assuming that you're going to fall into one of these categories. And so it's for individual artists who are absolutely professional. They have a history of all the things you see on your screen there. It's just a unique opportunity if you're in that literary space. So someone has a Canada Council for the Arts Research and Create grant for a project that starts in April. It will be ongoing afterwards, past April. Is it feasible to apply for one of the funding opportunities for the same project? Oh yeah. You should apply for additional funding if the funder has not already given you 100%. Let's say you have this great artistic project that costs $25,000. A funder says that they'll give you $15,000. If you still have costs, you can apply. Some funders even let you do retroactive grant applications. So you incurred some costs in the past and they'll actually cover some of those expenses. Be really careful about reading the guidelines. Not all funders allow this. But I remember I was working on a sculpture grant with an artist, and the funder actually said you could claim expenses up to like 5 months before we even applied for the grant. So it was awesome. And those sorts of things are really rare. Do apply for multiple grants for the same project. Here's my tip. Don't think that you can get away with asking the same funders, you know, Ontario Arts Council and Toronto Arts Council, for instance, for the exact same thing, and they won't know. Oh no, they know. They talk to each other, they call each other, funders even hang out. I even know one set of funders that goes on vacation together. Funders pick up the phone and talk to each other. So always ensure transparency. If you've asked Toronto Arts Council for $5,000, mention that on your OAC grant. It actually helps you. Funders know each other and they will pick up the phone and talk to each other, and we certainly did. It's like this unique clique that forms, so I hope that helps. In the literary world, there's also literary creation projects for works or for performance, closes in early September, September 8th specifically. So creation of literary works, specifically for publication, $12,000. Very specific. You have to have a recent professional publishing history with at least one traditionally published book, or at least 3 traditionally published short stories, comics, poems, etc., for which you've been paid, or you have to have an entire self-publishing professional practice. So if you qualify, you know who you are, and if you don't fall into one of these 3 ors, don't apply. So deaf and disability, folks can self-identify here. This closes on October 13th, $10,000 for creation, $10,000 for production, up to $10,000 for professional development. So you have to actually identify with this disability. I'm not sure what type of documentation they require. Does this exclude you from applying for other OAC grants? No, but should you let the program manager know what else you're applying to? Yes, always let them know, because it could actually help you if they found out that you applied to a deaf and disability arts grant, because they want to give all artists opportunity, and they want to make it easier for folks to apply, especially if you're facing any barriers. Look at this one. This one really surprised me. Toronto Arts Council has a Black Arts Projects grant. So I think you just have to identify as Black, which is amazing that they've given this opportunity. There's been barriers for sure for Black artists, especially in Toronto, to be able to access funding. It hasn't always been as diverse as things are starting to get. So this is a good dialogue and a good avenue for the funder to take to address anti-Black racism. And so it closes on October 6th, $15,000 for creation and development, $20,000 for presentation. Individuals, organizations, and collectives. Sadly, you have to live in Toronto, but if you do, that's a great opportunity. And again, you can apply for this and other opportunities that we mentioned. And I see it is 8 o'clock. If folks have to go, certainly connect with Mississauga Arts Council to get more information. And if you do need any help, we always are grateful for referrals from MAC. And if folks are sticking around, we will be opening it up to questions extremely shortly. Just really quickly, multi and inter-arts projects, March 22nd, September 22nd. $10,000 for creation, $20,000 for production and presentation, series and festivals 15, and development projects 8K. So it's really confusing. These grants within a grant, you have to figure out where you fit. They don't fund events or activities that take place outside of Ontario. Not surprising, because it's a provincial funder. Okay, so March 22nd is the deadline for that one. And multi and inter-arts is about two or more genres that I believe the definition is that they're in balance at the same time, sort of equal. It's 50% dance, 50% film, or 50% theater, 50% visual arts. Like, it has to be in some sort of equilibrium. So you really want to make sure that you meet that definition. Curatorial funding opportunities. Look at this. $30,000 for Indigenous identifying folks and $30,000 for people of color. So are you a curator who identifies as a person of color? I mean, this is amazing to see that the OAC would offer a grant specifically for Indigenous and culturally diverse folks. I haven't seen this before. They can get fees for the curator, $10K, money for mentorship, money for publication expenses, money for exhibition productions. Even if you're somebody putting on an exhibition, you may want to hire a diverse curator, get them to apply for this grant, and all of a sudden you're getting money towards your exhibition, right? So the curator can actually apply for a lot of money, many sort of pools of money in one grant application. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this one. This is new, it's unique. If you're a person of color, or if you're able to hire a culturally diverse curator or Indigenous curator, power to you. And exhibitions. OAC's exhibition assistance sadly offers $500 to $2,000. I wasn't very impressed by that, but for folks who are working in visual arts, craft, media arts practices, and wanting to present their work. As long as your exhibition is confirmed, you can apply. And I believe it's a rolling deadline, if I'm not mistaken, and that entire program, I wouldn't say it closes January 13th. I would say that's the end date that they've given, and they'll probably be reassessing. So definitely go for it and apply if and when you can.
Thank you so much for that, Rohit. Questions are sort of slowing down a little, so I think perhaps we'll call it for this evening, because we actually will continue this discussion next week. Mac is really excited. We have Canada Council for the Arts joining us next Thursday. That's March 3rd at 7 p.m. for an info session. So you'll notice we didn't really touch on their grants here, and that's because we're going to be doing it next week, which is really exciting. So hopefully you can come. Again, you can register through Eventbrite, and more information is on MississaugaArtsCouncil.com, and you can click on TD Culture Lab in the programs menu. So we'll continue our grant journey. We also have other TD Culture Lab webinars coming up. One this Thursday, live streaming next week, social media. So everything you want to learn is coming up soon. So thank you again, Rohit, for joining us and sharing this information, and for everyone for joining us. I hope you have a great night.